this morphological comparison appears rigorous, and we would agree with the majority of the assessment.
Wow.
We agree that there are multiple correspondences between the daguerreotype and the death masks and Maudsley drawings. Therefore, we agree that the daguerreotype is likely an authentic image of Joseph Smith in life.
Ooh. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
I was so thrilled to read that conclusion and to see who gave it. And what's really more amazing is normally peer review is done, anonymously. They submitted it with their names both at the top of the report and digitally signed on the bottom of the
So they
PDF
have
with the date
nothing to
timestamps.
lose. They have
Yep.
they have no there's no motivation for them to be to be swayed in any way whatsoever.
We don't really know where the world is gonna go. But now everybody knows that you can't stop for too long. Got to keep going. Don't really know where the world is gonna go.
Okay, folks, brothers and sisters, boys and girls, welcome back to another edition of The Last Dispensation. And remember that you are living in this time, the last dispensation. I have a very interesting human being guest, Curtis Weber. This gentleman I met at the firm conference, and some of you have already seen a couple little plugs that I have put out. But before I introduced you, well, I don't have a bio because I, I don't know, I kind of like the mysteriousness of you as well. But uh, before I before I allow you to introduce further yourself and maybe give a brief bio, um, I do want to say this. I want to say that I had no interest whatsoever anymore in what the prophet Joseph Smith looked like before I met Mr. Brother Weber at the firm conference. However, it's kind of like anybody else that when you're minding your own business and somebody comes into town, the traveling daguerreotype guy, and wants to pitch his cause to you, and then all of a sudden you become more interested than you were before if anyone even brought up this stuff, which was a couple years ago, right? With this famous locket guitar daguerreotype. There's been many other images of the prophet too. Well, alleged photos and daguerreotypes and paintings of the prophet Joseph Smith. Uh, but he had a very compelling case. And it wasn't even that long that I even met with him. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. So without further ado, would you like please to introduce yourself a little more and then we can go from there?
Sure. My name's Curtis Weber. I am born in the covenant, longtime member of the church. Uh, Grew up in Southern California and then spent my high school years in the DC area in Northern Virginia. I came out to BYU for my education and then went on my mission. I served in Bulgaria and then came home and went back to BYU and my wife and I got married out here while we were both at BYU and we ended up getting I ended up getting jobs out here and we stayed and we've made Utah our home ever since. Um, my interest in all things Joseph dates back to teenage years when I used to borrow my mom's copy of Teachings of the Prophet Joseph Smith and spend my evenings as a stupid, crazy teenager reading about the prophet and, wondering about holy things and God and eternity and so forth. And always kind of had a belief in testimony, but uh, don't know where that real interest in the prophet's life and teachings came from. It may be because I didn't grow up surrounded by members, and I often had a lot of antis, a lot of different religions around me and different ideas, and so I was always talking with friends as they would find out that I was LDS and ask questions and so forth. And I used to even I went to an Ed Decker presentation once, and things like that, just to see what people were saying about us because we were constantly surrounded by that. Um, when I came home from my mission, I became acquainted with a wonderful man, a man of both faith and scholarship, Andrew Ehat, who is, for my money, the world's leading Joseph Smith scholar alive today. And I'll show a picture and talk about that for a little bit. But it's because of him and my interest in Joseph grew after my mission, and I became very involved in helping him prepare future publications on the life and teachings of the prophet. And because of his name and reputation, people reach out to him. And it's because of that that I got interested in this whole question of what Joseph looked like and potential photographs. Because, like you, Troy, prior to that day when Andrew called me, I just wasn't interested in the subject at all.
Right.
Because what does it matter what he looked like, right? I mean, he knows what he looked like, and the people who were alive with him know what he looked like, and we're all going to see him again, and we're all going to remember that we knew what he looked like because we lived before we came, and so did he. Um, but it's just a topic that's become part of my life that I could never have predicted. So if you want to jump into it, I'll start with the slides and start showing you
Yeah,
kind of more
absolutely.
of that
Well,
story.
and just to add to that real quick, and then we'll get started. I think the reason I stopped having an interest was because we weren't. It was always kind of there was no smoking gun. If we
Mm-hmm.
actually said this is the picture and we could prove it and it's this is him, then it would be like, oh wow, I want to hang that in my house, you know. But we never quite reached that yet. However, maybe until today. Uh, so yeah, you go ahead and start your presentation, and then I'll just come in with some questions once in a while.
Well, I'll start off with a slide that does exactly kind of what you talked about, the fact that there's all these different candidates that have been proposed over the years. Either someone has discovered a photo or someone else has discovered it, and then someone sees it and says, "Well, I think I'm going to research that because I think that's the prophet." And that's the kind of world that I was in. I think on the day that I first got introduced to this whole topic in depth, I think I knew that I did know for a fact there are no authenticated photos of the prophet. And that might be one reason why I really wasn't that interested in the topic is, okay, maybe there's a photo, maybe there's not, but none of them have been proven. And I think I might have known that there's no contemporary documentation, contemporary meaning something created in or very close to Joseph's lifetime by which we could either know or could that would clearly imply that he had been photographed in life. And so it was not a topic that, like I said, that I'd been very interested in, didn't matter to me hardly at all. I care still much more about the teaching and history and doctrine that of Joseph's life and the things that were revealed to and through him. But I mentioned my friend Andrew Ehat. He called me up one Friday morning in February 2008 and asked what I knew about purported pictures, and I told him not much. And he said, "Well, go read this article on a purported picture, and then come to my house after work." So I did at lunch. I read the article and then drove to his house after work, and he had been approached by someone who had discovered this picture and thought that it might be Joseph, and they were so
Yeah.
convinced that they were trying to acquire the image. And when he showed me that, boy, I got sucked in so hard, so fast. I thought, "Oh, how could we test this? Because we don't have any documentation he was photographed." But look how much data there is in this photo. It was beautiful. It was tall. I thought, if that's Joseph, I'm not going to be disappointed. And when we were first approached, we had only a low resolution image. And I did my initial contour tracings, matching angles of the mask and so forth, uh, I became pretty convinced that this could be a real candidate. This might be the prophet. However, after about 30 days, we got the high resolution image of the daguerreotype, and it turned out to be someone who doesn't match Joseph's anatomy, and it's a known figure. Oops, it's a known figure of an image of Alexander Hugh Holmes Stewart, a politician from Virginia, and it's in the Library of Congress. So this guy wasn't going to be buying it, and it wasn't going to be, yeah. So, but that sucked me down the rabbit hole really fast because it forced me, even though it was kind of a wild goose chase, it forced me to ask the question of how would you be able to test a reported image? And I mean forensically test, not just look at it and say, do I think that's Joseph or not? But how could we actually study and analyze and come up with evidence whether it was or wasn't? And so I did that for that Alexander Hugh Holmes Stewart image. And of course, I became fascinated by the question because I got sucked into, early photography, anatomy, facial identification. I'm not an expert. I'm not trained. I've never taken courses or worked professionally in any of those fields, but they're all pertinent to this question. I got so sucked in that I started studying that stuff extremely deeply. And just to illustrate how deeply, I got involved in a small controversy uh, surrounding Joseph and Hiram's gravesite. Uh, Following their 1844 murders, they were buried multiple times, the most recent being in January of 1928 when their skulls were dug up, identified, photographed, measured, and then reburied. And more recently in 1994, and this is stuff I was learning about in 2008, three researchers rather, from Community of Christ or from RLDS Church at the time, Lachlan Mackay, Ron Romig, and Henry Inouye, they had analyzed a purported photo, the scanned daguerreotype, and a copy of the death mask and photographs of what was originally identified as Hiram's skull. And they came to the conclusion that remains of Hiram and Joseph had been misidentified in 1928. Well, when I was learning about all this, someone put me in contact with both Shannon Tracy, who published 2 books on the subject, claiming to prove that the conclusion of these 3 RLDS scholars was true, that indeed the skulls had been misidentified. And I also got in contact with DJ Bodden, who is a sculptor living here in Utah who has been creating likenesses of Hiram and Joseph since the late 1970s. And in fact, Bodden had produced a series of forensic drawings back in 1995 in response to Tracy's first book, showing how the identifications from 1928 were actually correct. And so I bought both of Tracy's books and read them very carefully. Uh, they're amazing resources for the historical information and the photographs of skulls and stuff. And I looked very carefully over DJ's drawings and had visits with him and understood his claims. But I looked at both sets of evidence and found that neither was forensically convincing. And I really couldn't believe that in 2008 we didn't know where Joseph Smith was buried for certain. And I thought, how do we not know this? I want to know where my prophet's buried, and I wonder if there's a way that I can know the answer. And so I studied the issue for about a month and decided I think I can do my own study. I think I can learn enough about all the sources and the process you would need to go through. And so I did that. I incorporated all of the available historical data and then combining that with principles of facial anatomy, including, for the first time ever, forensic tissue depth studies. I conducted my own study. At first, I did it on my kitchen table with copies of the death mask, literally on my kitchen table, and came to a conclusion and was telling a friend who at the time was, he was working on the Joseph Papers project. And I told him, hey, I've done my little research and I know where Joseph Smith is buried. And I told him my 90-second answer. And he changed my life by saying, when are you going to publish? It had never crossed my mind that I would do something that would be published in a historical journal or would be of any value to the wider public. And so I thought, I can't publish this as is. I have to go and use the actual oldest known death mask. So I actually went and obtained permission from the Church History Museum to photograph 2 oldest known sets of masks of both Hiram and Joseph in this custom rig that I designed and built. And I took hundreds of photos, each photo having a mask at a documented degrees of rotation, pitch, and tilt relative to a fixed position camera. And then using that library and combining it with the knowledge of the anatomy of the human head, I attempted to find the best fit of each skull on each mask, or rather the other way around, each mask on each skull, and did that until I could find the closest anatomically acceptable fit on each skull. And I was able to measure tissue depths and skull sizes down to the 1/4 millimeter. So I was trying to be extremely precise and very forensic in my work. Now, using that methodology, I came to the conclusion, I discovered the evidence was that DJ Bodden was correct. The skulls were correctly identified in 1928, which means if you've gone or go to their grave sites in Nauvoo today, the grave sites have been correctly marked since that most recent reinterment in January of 1928. Now, that's all just background to show how crazy I am and get into these topics and how it just consumed me for about a year and a half, 2 years of my life. But as part of that study, uh, I had to address the question of Joseph Smith's death mask, of his appearance, because some people claim that the death masks are art and therefore don't have any forensic value, or there are other issues and problems with it that make it not useful for determining what Joseph looked like, because he's been dead about 24 hours, we believe, no, probably no less than 22, and we don't know what the maximum outside is, but the day after they're killed is when they're brought home from Carthage to Nauvoo. And it's that evening and night that they start making the death mask molds that come off the faces of Hiram and Joseph. Now, these are the two oldest known masks in existence. Troy, have you ever been to the Church History Museum and seen the Dibble masks?
Oh, and only in Salt Lake.
Yeah, the ones in Salt Lake on the
Yeah.
left, the Dibble. Yeah, those are
Yes.
on mostly permanent display. They did pull them off display so I could photograph them. I thought that was very,
Now those are
I
the
couldn't.
original. Yeah, those are the original, right?
But this is believed to be the Dibble mask is believed to be a copy, possibly a first generation cast off of the
Oh,
original mold.
okay.
We don't know, but it's certainly super early in the process. So an 1844 cast of the mold. And then the pedestal mask is also owned by the Church History Museum, and it's not on display, but it's believed to be a copy of the Dibble masks made in at least no later than 1849, because we believe John Taylor took this mask and the one of Hiram to Europe with him on his mission, and then when on his way home he had small busts of Hiram and Joseph made. Now, the reason they're important, though, is one is older and one has been damaged, and the other is more intact, right? So the older one has been damaged and is missing detail. In Joseph's case, a bunch of hair detail at the top, as well as you can see some cracks along the face and the chin. But despite the fact that it's damaged, the Dibble mask is still more forensically significant because it contains finer detail. And that's another reason why we can believe that the pedestal masks are a copy. There's a loss in the fidelity and the minutia of the little tiniest details, bumps and ridges around
Mm.
eyes and eyelashes and the nostrils and the
Yeah.
lips and so forth.
Can
Yeah.
I ask something real quick?
Sure.
Or
Yeah,
just,
absolutely.
I don't want to throw you off, and
No,
my
you're not
audience
throwing
is
me off.
like,
This is what I
shut
do. I
up.
have conversations with people
Okay.
all the time.
Uh, so is the original mask? Uh, did that just go away?
No, that mask is a photo I took in 2009, and
Okay,
it's currently sitting on display in the Church History Museum. All you
that's
gotta
the
do is
same one. Okay, that's not the
that's the
Dibble
exact
mask.
same one.
Oh,
Yep, that's the exact same one.
but but
Now,
but it, but the Dibble mask was taken from the original,
from the original mold, we think we don't know if this is so you have the dead face, you have
right?
the plaster applied to make the original mold. They pull that mold off, and now you have a
Oh,
mold that's a
that's right.
negative of the
Okay,
face. Then they fill that negative void with plaster, and they pull that out, possibly destroying or damaging the mold in the process, the original mold, and that's the first cameo or death mask.
okay,
It can be called a cameo or a death mask, and that's what we have here, is a cameo or a death mask. And we don't know for certain that it's first generation, but we do know that there's not an older one that has better provenance.
okay. And
Uh,
that's
but
what
we
I
know that
meant.
it's
The
death
Dibble
mask.
mask is not necessarily the actual one that they peeled,
It
right?
wouldn't be the mold, because the mold would be a negative. It's like if someone put
No, I
plaster and
understand that.
made it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
We
it
don't.
might be the first cast made from that mold. It might be
Do
the
we
first
have the
generation.
mold? That's what I meant. Do we have the
No, the
mold?
mold, no,
Okay,
we don't. The mold probably would have been destroyed or damaged after one,
gotcha.
maybe two copies. Yeah,
Gotcha.
it's a good
That would have
question.
been
Very
amazing to
unfortunate.
have that, right? So
Oh yeah, yeah.
here's what I was gonna point out, and I think you'll like this, and I'll let you continue. As you get more into the other masks, at like doing more and more from the Dibble, I could see in the left eyebrow, you see more character, you see more wrinkly, you see more accentuations of like what I'm doing with my eyes right here, and less you see less of it over here. Do you know what I'm
So,
saying?
yeah, yeah.
That's
So his right
important,
eye,
right?
that is on our left is his right eyebrow. And it has more contour, more ridges, more evidence of the eyebrows than the left,
More
which is a
character.
fascinating little
Yeah,
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
more mood, more
Yeah.
wrinkle, more where he's squinching a little bit like that instead of nothing at all. Anyway, I just
But it is a legitimate thing to point out, and it's part of this question of how much detail of Joseph's face did it capture, and then how reliable is it? Like we know he's dead, and we know that faces can change even significantly. If you've ever been to a funeral of a friend, someone you've known well in life, and have an open casket viewing, you know that sometimes they don't look like themselves. It's hard. Like I went to the funeral a couple years back of a dear friend that I knew for probably over 20 years, and boy, his face was not in that body anymore. It just looked
right,
so different. Other people I can see and say, oh, yeah, that's much closer. That's much more like the person I knew.
right.
And we do have statements that of people who saw Joseph's body both before and after the masks were made, who said that Joseph looked natural in death. So that's a clue, but that doesn't tell us how natural or how close to a living face, right?
Yeah, and I've heard people at funerals say, "Oh, that looks just like them. They look so beautiful." And then the mother of the son will look at them and go, "No, it doesn't. Looks
Yeah,
nothing
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
them."
yeah.
So that
Yeah.
could just be some trite phrase that somebody
That's
blurted
right.
out,
That's not
right?
proof, but it's something to
Right.
consider at the very least.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I also
there's
liked really quick. I also liked that you made it. You emphasized that the time of when the death mask was made, which is very important. I know you'll get to that probably.
there's actually a whole larger story to that, which I won't go into, and there's a lot of research that needs to be done on it, and I don't know how much we can know, but there have been some efforts made to try to pull resources and experts to learn more about the masks themselves. Hopefully I'll be able to either others will publish some research or I'll gather some experts and get some of that research that I've been given copies of published so that the public can see that. But some people really do doubt that this is reliable. Some people call it art. And then you could say, yeah, in a certain sense, it's art. But just like, sculpting a face accurately would be art, it is
Right.
art. But if you scan it 3D and print it out, you can call it art too. The real question is how reliable is the mask? So, for instance, some people hoping to explain why their purported or their favored photo of Joseph doesn't match his death mask, these people have proposed the the events of his violent death caused fractures to his face, so that especially the lower third of the face is sagging, and some even claim his chin is receded, so he doesn't even look like himself. He would have had a much more forward-looking chin, they say. And again, this is in their attempt to explain why the death mask doesn't match the actual photo that they believe is a photo of Joseph Smith. Now, that hypothesis appears plausible, I guess, to many. And I honestly do not know of but one serious objection to it, Troy, and that is that it's not true. It's demonstrably false. And the reason that we know it's false is because Joseph sat to have his profile traced by a folk artist named Sutcliffe Maudsley, a convert from England who was living just behind Joseph's house. Um, we know the date because it's in Joseph's journal. Now, we don't have the original tracing that Maudsley created that day, but we do have the original drawing. This drawing here is the original drawing that was created by Maudsley using and based on that tracing. And the reason we know that is if you zoom in on the face of the drawing and you trace the profile of the drawing and compare that to the death masks, we can see that the forehead,
Oh,
nose, lips,
wow.
and chin all align beautifully.
Wow.
And what's the only rational explanation, Troy? They're both derived from his actual face, undistorted, unbroken,
Yes.
you know. That's the only rational explanation that explains the strength of the correspondence between the artwork produced by a man who we know traced his profile, and the actual profile of his death mask.
Hmm.
So this disproves the broken, sagging, receded chin idea. It also proves that the mask is reliable not only for the profile shape and the vertical spacing of the eyes, nose, mouth, and chin in death, but also in life, because they obviously in 1842 he's alive when Maudsley is tracing and then drawing the prophet based on that tracing, right?
Yeah.
So all of that's kind of cursory background to understand when we go into the forensic analysis of this picture which was announced on Thursday, July 21st, 2022. I remember the day very well for some reason. I was sitting at my desk working, and somebody messaged me, a friend of mine who at the time worked for the church history department, and said, "You've probably already seen the news, but what do you think?" And I hadn't seen the news, and so I just saw the headline. Does an image of Joseph Smith exist? And I thought, oh, I didn't even see the image yet, and I started laughing to myself, thinking, oh, I've been down this kind of rabbit hole, this wild Daguerrean goose chase. I know exactly what this is, and I'll probably be able to disprove it in 15 to 20 minutes, just like every other photo. Now that I know, now that I've developed these skills and resources. I mean, I don't know how many people have a library of over 700 photos of the two oldest known masks at documented angles of, you know, and I just thought, well, I'll go to my library, I'll find one that's close to the angle, and
Right.
I'll disprove this pretty quickly. And I felt confident in that because in my analysis of other purported photos in this developed interest that I had since 2008, of course, none of them had proven to be true. I could disprove all of them pretty much. And there's one that is, I'm almost certain is not him, but I can't say for certain. It's called the scannel daguerreotype, but it's much more blurry. And when something lacks detail, it's hard to have a forensically sound, detailed analysis and to be super confident. But I don't think it's him. But anyway, the point is, I assumed this wasn't Joseph from the outset. I'd be able to dismiss it quickly, and I set to work right away doing that.
But can I
Um,
ask you something? What was so deep in your mind that what are the one or two things that just said, "Nah, that's not him" to you at
uh,
first?
well, honestly, I think I looked at the hair first,
Okay.
and I think I kind of thought, oh, that's goofy looking hair. And just my idea of, I had done my own digital creation of Joseph using the death mask and the Alexander Hugholm Stewart image. And I had looked at all of the artwork and I had been so deep in this. It just didn't feel like Joseph's face to me. It just my
Right.
first gut, it was a gut reaction, both based off the hair and then just the face. Like, yeah, I don't think so. I
Well,
didn't
and
say that's not him.
even from the death mask, everyone thinks more rounder features, but when you look more, the more I look at it, I'm seeing, well, he didn't necessarily not have rounder features as I look at it more and more.
Yeah, well,
But
what's
anyway,
interesting is
that's
I have an artist friend who told me very early on, he says, I've always thought the death mask looked slightly swollen.
that's what I
And
meant.
boy, yeah, the instant he said that, I can't help but see the slight puffing of the face.
Right.
And that's
Because
a fascinating
he was
detail.
beat up bad, of course,
And it's
and
the
he
middle of
just
July, so
swelled up.
it's the body is
Yeah.
decomposing and you're
Right.
beginning to get some swelling. And I've since found documentation in the National Institute of Health, their free website, everyone can go on it, that between 18 to 36 hours following death is when facial tissues begin to swell and you begin to get slippage of skin. And we're right in that window at around the 22, 24 hour when we think the death masks could have been made that early and then
Yeah.
maybe a few hours later than that. So before we get into the forensics, where did this image come from? That's kind of an important question. The picture's contained in a locket owned by Dan Larsen, and Dan received it from his mother, Lois Smith Larsen, not long before she passed away in November of 1992. Now we don't know who owned it for certain beyond Lois, but it's very fascinating that Lois is the daughter, one of the two daughters of Frederick Madison Smith, second president of the RLDS Church, and of course his father is Joseph Smith III, first president of the RLDS Church, and we all know who his parents are. So it was very intriguing that this locket was coming through this very prominent line potentially of the Smith family. Now the locket itself, I wish I had it to show you, but that's a photograph of the locket in my left hand. I'm 5'7", so I'm not a giant person. It's the locket is less than 1.5 inches in diameter, which is pretty small. And the locket's even, the daguerreotype rather, is even smaller than that.
Mm.
My estimate is just under 0.6 inches from the top of the hair to the bottom of the chin. The face is under zero point 0.6 inches tall. I initially did my research using very low resolution images that were published in the Deseret News. And then later in that day, I got a copy, or the next day, I got a copy of the the John Whitmer Historical Association journal and read the announcement article and used images from it. But these are high resolution images that are copyrighted from or by Dan Larsen that I obtained a license from with his kind permission. And I'm really grateful to Dan for his willingness to let me research this image as closely and minutely as I possibly can, or as we possibly can. Now, since daguerreotypes are, well, maybe I should go back a little bit. Have you ever held a daguerreotype? You ever
Yeah.
seen a daguerreotype?
Yes.
They're very unique artifacts. They're essentially photosensitive mirrors invented in August of 1839 and named for their inventor, Frenchman Louis Daguerre.
Mm-hmm.
And it's within a month of their announcement. The formula is now in New York. It's been brought over from France, and Americans just embrace the daguerreotype. And America becomes the country that is the most daguerreotype crazy of the whole world. I think. I think
I
it's
know.
estimated that millions of daguerreotypes, or over a million daguerreotypes, were made in its course. Daguerreotypes are popular from the time they're invented until about 1860. They very quickly fall out of favor when a new technology, an ambrotype, is invented, and it's cheaper, faster, safer to create an ambrotype. But because they're essentially photosensitive mirrors, the image that is captured on its metal, this is a plate of metal covered in silver that's been photosensitized. They're almost always backwards. Almost all daguerreotypes. I don't know what the actual number is. I don't know anyone knows the actual number, but the vast, vast majority of daguerreotypes are mirror images. So I immediately, at the very outset, just flipped the image right away, and I thought my first test is going to be flipped. That's how often daguerreotypes are backwards. And so I simply pulled out one of my photographs of the pedestal mask because it's white and I can compare contours more easily than against the Dibble mask. So this is the second oldest mask, but it passed the first test just fine. This is just a simple vertical spacing test to make sure that whether or not features would align, because we know from the Maudsley comparison that the death mask is pretty accurate to the vertical spacing of facial features. And this image passed so amazingly right off the bat. I didn't have to fudge around to get a second image. It was like within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, I was like, oh, well, it matches really closely. Now, what's intriguing is my second thought when I first saw the picture before I even started this analysis. It is interesting. He has a rather tall lower third of the face. Because Troy, maybe I'll show this to you sometime. You go and analyze almost any other purported picture, and you're going to fail to just match the vertical spacing of the facial features. And when a picture fails to just get that basic alignment down, the odds that it's a picture of Joseph just went down really, really low. You'd have to find out some kind of reason why his photograph wouldn't match the spacing of the death mask features.
Now they do say that first test can pass some and it not be
Yes,
that
exactly
person,
right. So
right?
this
Yeah.
doesn't mean anything other than it's worth going to the next step. That's all that
Okay.
means. And I knew that. I thought this doesn't prove anything. This guy, okay, so he has a similar proportioned face. That's
Maybe
all it
even a
means, right?
cousin of the prophet too, or
It
whatever.
doesn't even
Yeah.
matter if it could be someone living today. You're going to find people who have these facial proportions,
Okay.
just spacing of eyes, nose, mouth, and chin. So the very next thing I did, and I thought this would disprove it, I'll just trace this guy's facial features and compare shapes. It's essentially called a morphological comparison. It's a fancy word for a shape comparison. And I'll just simply place those contours from the locket directly on the death mask and compare them. And when I did that, I was
Oh my
very, very
goodness.
surprised to discover a high degree of correspondence. I mean, I saw that chin and the orbicularis oris. He's got an asymmetrical face there with that line. I saw the best correspondence at the mouth I'd ever seen to any purported photo. There was even correspondences I could see at the philtrum, the nasolabial folds, and the nose was amazing to me. I was so stunned by the nose that first morning, or that first afternoon or evening, I should say. I just thought, wow, that's amazing. There's correspondences even at all three sides of the forehead, with
Mm.
hair being present on the right side of the mask and running up to what appears to be the natural part, and then hair sloping downward, then going almost vertical off the edge of the mask where there's no evidence of hair on the left side. But Troy, there are only some moderate correspondences on the right eye here on the left side of the screen, and some obvious differences on the left eye. And I thought, well, I don't know what to think exactly because I didn't study eyes very carefully. I didn't need to do that as part of my original skulls and mask research. back in 2008, 2009. And I do know that, of course, in life you can move your eyebrows and flesh around your eyes a bit. The man in the daguerreotype is looks like he's squinting very slightly against bright light. Daguerreotypes aren't like modern photography. They require a lot of very bright light. So much so that daguerreotypists would often use mirrors to cast direct sunlight onto their subject, or they would use skylights. And you couldn't take daguerreotypes on cloudy, rainy days. There wasn't enough light. You needed more light. And so it's well known that many figures and faces in daguerreotypes are squinting against or fighting the brightness of the light shining on their face. It's a
Oh.
fascinating detail.
Oh. Okay.
And so I knew that. And I also know that, like we mentioned, in death, sometimes you don't look like yourself. There can be changes to the face in death, especially around the eyes. Tissues can be sunken into the eye sockets, for instance, and things like that. So I didn't know what to think about the eyes. But because of the strength and number of the correspondences everywhere else, I very, very quickly, like in under about 30 minutes, I realized I could not dismiss this image at all. I realized not only can I not disprove it, this is actually like a legitimate candidate. I kept saying, this is a real contender. Like this is a possibility. I couldn't believe the number of correspondences I was seeing. It was the best image, best match to the death mask of any purported image I had ever analyzed, and I had analyzed all the major ones prior to this announcement of this image. Now, the researchers who studied this image quietly for almost 2 years before they announced it, they're Ron Romig and Lachlan Mackay, two of the men I mentioned earlier from the RLDS Church, now Community of Christ, who proposed that the remains of Hiram and Joseph had been misidentified. Now, they studied that image and then wrote this announcement article. And in the article, they do mention that daguerreotypes are usually backwards, but they never show the daguerreotype reversed. And they only included two images, two figures showing Joseph's death mask compared to the daguerreotype. And in each instance, it's only compared to the unreversed daguerreotype. Now, Troy, I was a bit confused by that because by the time I got to their article and started going through it carefully, I had already been able to show that if you leave the daguerreotype unreversed, the hair in the daguerreotype contradicts the hair in the mask. It's going the
Right.
wrong
Of
direction.
course.
And the nose curves the wrong way. And those are the two most obvious differences, contradictions, if you will, among several. There's several others. And I thought, that's very curious to me that they wouldn't even show it reversed. Now, they also didn't compare it to Sutcliffe Maudsley's art, but honestly, Sutcliffe Maudsley is the only artist, I should say his art is the only art that we know of where we know who the artist was and we know why it was created and we know when it was created. And so they didn't show comparisons, but there are comparisons from the top of the hair all the way down to the bottom of the chin. Here, Maudsley has placed the eye in this particular drawing too low and slightly recessed, but if you correct for that error by using the death mask, I've discovered that there were roughly 14 correspondences to the daguerreotype and no contradictions. And so I thought, well, that's curious. That spurred me to keep looking. But instead of comparing it either to the death mask or to Maudsley's art, they compared it more frequently in their article to this famous portrait of Joseph, which we all know. And again, they were comparing the unreversed daguerreotype, which I knew if it's unreversed, it doesn't match Joseph's death mask and contradicts it. And the closeness of the match only occurs when you flip the image. So this was really something that I puzzled over a bit. Now, reading their article carefully and hearing their arguments, I realized, well, they saw, as this image from their article illustrates, they saw 6 correspondences between the daguerreotype, the unreversed daguerreotype, and this famous painting, this portrait of Joseph. And I thought, okay, I'd like to do my own comparison. I want to see if I see the same thing at higher resolution in close up, right? Now, this painting, like I said before, is arguably the most famous portrait of Joseph Smith. We know that it was owned by Emma, and we know that she gave it to her son Joseph III before she died. We know that Joseph, before he died, passed it on to his son Frederick, Dan Larsen's grandfather. And we know that at some point, and I haven't been able to find the research or do the research on this, in the Community of Christ archives, but it passed into the ownership of the RLDS Church. So it went from the family to the institution. Now, many people don't know this, but in March of 2024, so about 13 months ago, it was sold as part of the deal that included the Kirtland Temple and the Nauvoo properties and other artifacts belonging to Joseph and Emma. And that painting is now owned by the church and is in the possession or the stewardship of the Church History Museum. And Troy, these are all facts. These are all well-known facts. We have documentation that it gives us very strong evidence of that this is the chain of custody. But there's two details we've never known about this painting, and that is we've never known who painted it or even when it was created. So for many, many years, the RLDS Church had it on display and had a little label saying it was William Major. The artist was William Major. A little problem though, William Major showed up in Nauvoo after Joseph was killed. Later that fall, but I believe it's in fall of 1844. And then sometime prior to 1972, that attribution was changed to artist unknown because experts said it doesn't match Major's style and is beyond his skill. So based off the strength of that analysis and that input from experts, they said, well, then this probably isn't Major because it's too good to be Major. And then, in response to some unpublished research, around the year 2007, it began to be attributed to David Rogers. Now, we do know for a fact that David Rogers painted a portrait of Joseph Smith in 1842, but we've never had solid documentation or evidence proving that this is that painting that Rogers created in 1842. That's a very curious detail. Now, it's also important to understand that, and this is analysis I did initially back in 2008, 2009. Anyone who's interested in the appearance of Joseph Smith has to consider this portrait as a potential primary portrait created by someone looking at him and painting this portrait. But it does not match the anatomy of the death mask. If you scale it eye to mouth between Maudslay's drawing, the mask, and the painting, we can see that the chins are just fine in that alignment, but the nose is not even close. There's a significant gap in the nose. And I'm not going to show you all the slides. I can try scaling and moving. You can never get all four lines to line up, never. Not even by pitching the mask forward and tilting it as if I can line up the eyes, nose, and mouth, but then it doesn't match the chin. But another way to see it is simply to compare the width and position of the nose to the mouth by overlaying the 3D model of the death mask. This is the Dibble death mask model.
Right.
And you can see that the mouth in the painting is significantly higher. And conversely, if you want to try to match the position of the mouth, you can see the nose is too low in the painting, which, it's obvious. And what's even more curious to me is the mouth in the death mask is wider than the mouth in the painting. The painting's mouth does not match the width in the mask. But it's a very curious detail, Troy, that if you take the width of the mask and only the width, and you reduce the width by 18%, look at that result. That is a near perfect match to the shape of the bottom lip and to the width of the mouth itself. And I thought, well, that's really curious that the mouth in the painting and the death mask have a similar shape, but only if you distort the death mask by 18%, the width of it. Very curious detail. Now, what this means, Troy, is that this painting, like I said, doesn't match the mask. And as just a quick bonus slide for everybody, all the purported pictures of Joseph that match the proportions of the painting, therefore also don't match the mask. And I've actually done comparisons of these paintings to the mask itself. And maybe someday, if people want to see it, I'll do another video interview with somebody and show all that. But they do not match the dimensions of the mask. Therefore, these are not 100% are not actual photos of Joseph. Instead, they're derived either directly or indirectly from the incorrectly proportioned painting, the portrait that hung in Emma's bedroom. That seems pretty straightforward, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
So again, I was intrigued by their reliance upon these 6 correspondences that they saw between this most famous portrait and the unreversed daguerreotype. So I decided, let me do my own test. Now, I've done this test twice now. This is These are actual photographs that I took in March of 2024, once the painting went on display, public display at the Church History Museum in downtown Salt Lake. And I just simply scaled the daguerreotype eyes to match the width approximately of the painting. Then I traced everything, the hair, the clothing, everything that I thought would be in the portrait potentially. And then, Troy, I simply did this. I simply hid the daguerreotype. And I had looked at this painting enough that when I saw this, I immediately realized I was stunned. I threw my hands up. I pushed my chair back. I gasped. I think I audibly gasped. And I went, oh my gosh. And to make it a little more clear what I saw in that moment, I've since traced the painting contours in blue. You can compare those contours on a white background, eliminating the texture and shadow and light and color and so forth. Troy, there are not 6 correspondences between this portrait and the unreversed daguerreotype. Uh, to date, I have discovered 76.
Amazing.
76 details.
Amazing.
Yeah.
That and is
Ah,
that in the okay, what do you call this study of the face? Is this forensics? What is this called?
so this would be a morphological comparison.
Morphological comparison.
This
And
is a
that's
shape comparison.
okay.
Yeah.
Is it common to find that
This
many in somebody that's not that person?
The more correspondences, the more you would be able to conclude that in fact one was created using the other as a reference, and that's what I immediately realized. I immediately realized 4 things, and I'll show those in just a minute.
Okay.
But the degree of correspondence immediately told me, oh my gosh, this painting was created using this unreversed locket that was just
Right.
announced. This was a week and a half or maybe 2 weeks into my research, so here I am at week 2, barely into my research, and I find this match. And at the time, I only had 50 correspondences. But once I was able to photograph this last year in high resolution, I went over every detail very, very carefully. There still might be a few that I forgot to look for. And I'm a one-man show who has a life who can't do this full time.
I know.
So, but
Well,
76
and I think
details.
you only showed me maybe 7 and I that was
Yeah,
enough for
I'll
me.
show you. I won't go through all 76, but uh, it's to be clear, there are differences in scale, but and even sometimes in rotation or position, but the shapes themselves, and even or most shapes anyway, and even some shadows and highlights in the painting appear to be copied directly off the unreversed daguerreotype. So let's look at the eye first, at the left side of the painting and the left side of the plate. The image on the left is the painting with the contours of the painting traced in blue. And then I've placed a copy of those contours at best fit over the daguerreotype. Now, to be clear, what that means is I'm either scaling or rotating slightly the daguerreotype just to see does it correspond in shape or not, right? That's what this proves. I will point out that this inner corner of the eye, what's called the medial canthus of the eye, is drawn in an anatomically incorrect way. It's connected to his upper eyelid fold and not the upper edge of his eyelid. If you look at any eye, and we'll see it on the next eye, the right side eye is actually correct. That's not how an eye, your canthus connects to your eyelid. It's
Right.
part of your eyelid. It's a
Right.
gap between your eyelids, I should say.
Yes.
Um, but it's apparently based off this shadow that
I know
exists, this
that cuz
blurry
I'm an
shadow.
artist. I draw.
Yeah, you can
I
see
know.
that, right? That correspondence is really strong. Well, then I decided, well, I haven't checked the flesh around the eye, so I traced the upper and lower eyelid folds and the bottom edge of the brow, the upper brow. But I realized, wow, that's really good correspondence to the eyelid folds, but the brow doesn't seem to be a correspondence. And when I was looking at that, I looked at that, Troy, and I said, wait a second, maybe that shape is right there. I said that's a very interesting contour. It's very distinct with that little change there right in the middle of it. And it turns out that if you rotate the daguerreotype 10 degrees and scale it 10% up, a little larger, that's the match. It's quite precise. And I thought, well, my gosh, if that matches, I've never tested the whole eyebrow because I thought they look so obviously different. Look at the match of the eyebrow. Again, the daguerreotype has to be rotated in 10 degrees and scaled up 10%. But there's some obvious correspondence there, all except this upper portion here in the middle, which my assumption is that the artist thought was a little too bushy and decided to to trim it off a little bit. If you look at the other eye, you can see that correctly drawn medial canthus where the eyelid is it's connected to the eyelid edge instead of the fold. And it has a slightly sagging upper eyelid on the outer portion of the lid. But that's exactly what you see in the daguerreotype. It's this medial canthus that's in shadow and a slightly sagging or apparently sagging upper eyelid based off the shadows and highlights. And I saw that and thought, well, what about the flesh around it? I traced those contours and said, even that flesh is a very good match, except this portion of the upper eyelid fold and this portion of the lower brow, those are fiction. Those are not in the daguerreotype. And so when I hid those to just see what the result was, they weren't in the daguerreotype, I realized, oh, it looks like they're just, it's a single contour, a shadow in the daguerreotype that was connected. All you had to do was break that line and then draw two separate lines. And what I think he did was just creating compositional balance. He's showing the full upper eyelid fold from left and right, and he's actually raising the eyebrow. And so I thought I better check the eyebrow. And it turns out that it looks like this eyebrow is almost, most of it anyway, is based on the daguerreotype, including that little dip in his upper left eyebrow, or what we're supposed to believe is the upper left eyebrow. But again,
Wow.
the daguerreotype is unreversed. So I saw that and thought, oh, this is amazing because these are clusters of features being copied, not individual lines, but now we have multiple lines being preserved in the painting in spatial relationship to each other. Troy, you may or may not know this, but this is the only depiction of Joseph in existence other than a copy of this portrait that was made, that Joseph Smith III had made, I should say, I believe in the late 1890s, early 1900s before he died, that has this glabellar fold or this frown line between the eyes. And you can increase the contrast here as I've done to see it more clearly. But when you trace that shape and compare it to the daguerreotype, it's clear that it's being copied off of the daguerreotype itself.
Absolutely. There's
Crazy,
no
huh?
doubt. I mean, look at the
Look at the
space. Yeah, that's great.
I'll go back. Yeah, look at the shape, all of it. I was just like,
Yeah.
wow. Even the relationship of the fold to the eye. Look down to the
Yeah, that's what I was.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
was like the canthus is almost perfectly in. And anyway, I was just stunned to find this. Uh the nose I used to think was different until I traced the width I knew was right, but I didn't know about the shape until I traced it and put the contour tracing over the daguerreotype. The flesh around the nose is a beautiful match. There's some guesswork being done on the very dark shadowed side on the right side of the daguerreotype plate itself. And the nostrils are much smaller in the painting. But it turns out that if you take the daguerreotype and shrink it, reduce its scale by 18% and rotate it, I think it's 5 degrees. Look at that match. I saw that shape and thought, huh, is that the same shape? And it turns out it's a looks like a very reasonable interpretation of the shape of the
Mhm.
nostrils directly from the locket. Now, here's another curious detail. If you put the daguerreotype at best overall fit to the face, this is how the mouth matches. And you can see the mouth in the daguerreotype is a little bit wider, and the corners of the mouth are pulled up in the painting. They're a little higher. But it turns out that if you take the daguerreotype and you reduce the width of just the width of the daguerreotype by the same 18%, that's the result.
Wow.
Look at the shape of the upper lip. Look how
Mm.
asymmetrical that lip is. Look at that lower lip. And I
Yeah.
thought, wow, even the shape of the mouth, even though it's been reduced in width, it's clearly based off the shape of the lips of this man in the daguerreotype.
Now
And because I
They talk about Joe Smith having a scar on his lip. Where was that?
I don't know. People keep saying it, and there might be some evidence. It's hard because the
Did you?
face is on one
Okay.
side in shadow, so it's hard to see exactly.
Is
Um,
that historically accurate or is that just hearsay?
well, I don't know. I haven't seen any forensic proof that proves that he had that scar,
Okay.
like
Okay.
someone like I haven't seen it documented. So there's lots of little statements and sayings that people have
Right.
reported to me over the years until I see the primary source. Like, is it in someone's journal of someone who knew him? Or is it the granddaughter or the daughter of someone who knew him who
Yeah.
said that? Like, you need to find the source and then analyze it and think, how reliable do you think it might be? And can people be misremembering or,
Yeah.
but
I
I
mean, in
actually,
my history, I thought my great great grandfather was killed by getting bit by a rattlesnake, and come to find out he didn't die that way. So, but that was something we passed down.
exactly. And our human memory is such a faulty thing. I've given this example in other interviews. I wrote something in my mission journal that I read one day, maybe 10, 15 years ago. I read it and I literally have zero recollection of this detailed story I was telling that happened that day. And if it weren't in my own handwriting in my journal, I would say that didn't happen to me.
Yeah,
I don't remember that at all. But
exactly.
I can't deny that I wrote that with my own hand in my journal, even
True.
though I have zero recollection of that story.
Yes.
And even sometimes I've gone back and read something that I thought I read correctly. I've even done it in doing this research. I thought I read a source and I read something and I misquote it to somebody and I go back and look and oh, it didn't say the thing that I thought it did. It said something close or maybe
Yes.
I added an extra word and it meant the opposite.
Well, I've been saying that Joseph F. Smith is the fifth prophet of the church and his son was the 10th. And then, no, wait a minute. Joseph F. Smith
It's
was
the
the sixth
sixth.
prophet of the church.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
there's
yeah.
so many videos in the past where I said the fifth. I'm like, oh my goodness.
If you
Yeah,
say something long enough, you'll think you remember it right because you're not remembering the same fact. If you look at memory studies, memories are like living things in our brains that we pull out and we affect them by the way we think of them and the way we interpret them, the way we even the act of recalling them can emphasize things or de-emphasize things, and we can get things wrong.
absolutely.
It's a fascinating field. I haven't dived deeply into it, but I've listened to a few podcasts on that. It's a
Yep,
very fascinating
that's
science.
so true.
Right. So seeing that 18% repeatedly, I really thought I should check for correspondence across features instead of individually. I had been only checking individual shapes one by one until I started, as I showed you, doing flesh around the eyes and so forth. And it turns out that if you place the daguerreotype at best overall fit to the painting, and then reduce the scale by 18% and rotate it 5 degrees, not only do you get a match like we saw at the nostrils, but you get a pretty decent match at the philtrum.
Mm,
Look at the match at the corner of the mouth. Look at the lower lip again. And then it helps to increase the contrast a bit. Look at that chin lip fold. It looks like all of those features are being preserved in spatial relationship from the locket and being drawn in the same spatial relationship
absolutely.
directly into the painting. And I was just stunned to find that it's clusters of shapes, just not even just individual shapes.
Well,
So
this whole area right here fascinates me. Just the whole mouth area. It's almost identical to the painting. The
yeah, I
jaw,
mean,
the chin, the mouth, yeah, all this.
yeah. What I immediately saw when I took away that daguerreotype layer and just saw the tracings of the daguerreotype against the painting, I immediately saw the hair and the orientation of the face, the fold of skin, and the shape of eyes, the nasolabial folds. But the hair was the first thing I was like, oh my gosh, that hair that I had grown to dislike because of its asymmetry in the painting, it looks like it's based directly on the locket, tight against the head on one side and high above the ear, leaving much of that ear visible, right? And then the other side, it covers most of the ear. Most of that's covered, and then it has it's a wider curve of hair, bigger bun, if you will, or a swish of
Yeah.
hair, and it follows and it goes out the same distance from the face, from the forehead that it does in the locket.
Artistic
And I saw
freedom,
that.
right? Artistic
Yeah.
freedom.
Well, speaking of, it is true that the hair is much, much taller in the painting than in the daguerreotype. Here again is the daguerreotype at best overall fit to the whole face. But then I was sitting talking to someone about it, and it just dawned on me. I had never tested the shape of the hair above. What happens if you slide the daguerreotype up and slightly to the right? Yeah, there's lots of correspondences. It's not
Mm,
perfect, like you said, a little bit of artistic liberty, but you can clearly see where there are correspondences to shapes of
right.
hair. So I saw all this evidence, and I immediately recognizing the strength, and I hadn't counted them or found every little detail, but I immediately realized that this painting was almost certainly created by an artist using the unreversed Larsen daguerreotype as his reference for the details of Joseph's face in the painting.
Wow.
which in turn means that the man almost certainly or very likely, a very high likelihood that the man in the daguerreotype really is Joseph Smith. And then since the daguerreotype is unreversed, and it unreversed, it doesn't match the mask, that leads me to conclude that his face is backwards in the painting, backwards from his actual appearance in life. And of course, that in turn indicates that the painting was created after Joseph was killed. Because why would you paint him backwards and from a locket if he's alive and he's able to come and sit down? And we know that Joseph sat in front of the artist for on four different dates over a 5-day span in September of 1842. If he's alive and sitting in front of you, Troy, do you paint him backwards?
No.
You don't paint. You paint what you see. You don't flip
Right.
it in your mind and say, I'm going to make this guy look backwards from his actual appearance in life, right? Now, so imagine my surprise when subsequent to all of this discovery, as I began analyzing the sources more closely, I found, I have since found 8 different lines of evidence that indicate that, in fact, painting is backwards and is created after Joseph was killed. Evidence that is entirely independent of the existence or non-existence of the Larsen daguerreotype. Now, it's been speculated for many, many years that this painting might be backwards and might be from a daguerreotype. I can find evidence back into the 1960s of scholars proposing that this might be from the unknown picture of the prophet. And I would not have believed it. I had no reason to disbelieve that this was the Rogers painting. Like most people, I just accepted whatever the label said in the museum. And but these lines of evidence clearly indicate, in fact, that the painting of Joseph rather, is backwards and probably after he's been killed. Now, I'll only have time to show you 3 of them. Let's talk about the color of Joseph's hair, because that's an important question. Daguerreotypes don't capture color the way you think they should, because they're not the same as a modern black and white photograph. That's our first assumption. Oh, it's an old-timey black and white photo. That's not exactly true. Look at how reds, oranges, yellows, and greens all come out almost like this dark black, almost, dark gray rather, but very, very dark. And then look at the blues. Look at the dark blue and the purple, the violet. That's almost
Almost the
invisible.
same,
It's almost
right?
invisible to a
Right,
daguerreotype.
right.
Yeah. So, and that's even true, Troy, of lighter hues. Look at that eye up on the top left in that pale yellow glass covering that photograph of an eye. And
Yes.
look at the daguerreotype of that same. You almost can't see the eye. But
Wait a minute.
contrast that to the
That's the
dark blue.
same, the
That,
one up
that,
the upper
yeah, yeah.
left.
On the left is a digital photograph of a board with a photo of an eye with different colored glass over it. And on the right is a daguerreotype of that same board. And
Why is
look
the
what color it does. Look
line
how
up?
dark.
The
I drew
bottom.
that dashed line just to highlight the lighter shade that,
Oh, okay.
yeah, I should
No, no, no,
probably
no. I
hide.
said the eyelid. How come the eyelid
Oh, yeah, yeah.
is the bottom eyelid is different?
It you can't quite see it in the blue because it's hidden. He might have used different eyes. I don't know.
Okay, it
Uh,
doesn't matter. I
this
understand the
this is a
point.
screen
Right,
cap off of a YouTube video, right?
right,
So
right. Gotcha.
so anyway, the fact is, some colors come out deceptively dark in a daguerreotype. Well, that appears to be the case with Joseph Smith's hair because look at the color of his actual locks of his hair that we have, that we know who cut them from his head and when, and we know where they've been essentially
Mhm.
this whole time. This is the top of Dimmick Huntington's martyrdom cane. Excuse me. Those locks were cut about 7 months after Joseph was killed during the second secret burial, where the first secret exhumation and then the second secret burial being done to move the body from the Nauvoo house property over to the property by either the Nauvoo, the mansion house rather, or the old homestead. These buildings were all kitty corner across the street from each other, right there in Water and Maine in Nauvoo. And then they took those locks and they put them into the top of Dimmick's martyrdom cane. It's called a martyrdom cane because the wood of the cane, the shaft of the cane, is made from strips of wood cut from the boxes that bodies of Hiram and Joseph were brought home in from Carthage to Nauvoo. So after they arrived, Emma had the strips cut up at some point and given to Joseph's closest friends, and they decided to turn them into walking canes. So they're
Wow.
called martyrdom canes. And that one actually has Joseph Smith's hair in it.
Yeah.
It happens that all three locks are Joseph's hair.
Can I say something?
Sure, sure, sure.
And we don't really know if he was that fair skinned because he's painting him from a daguerreotype that's black and white,
Well,
right? Or I
we
don't
have
know.
descriptions. We have written descriptions of people, independent of the painting and daguerreotype, that say Joseph had fair complexion, even pale skin.
Okay, okay,
So whether that's how accurate that is, I don't know.
okay.
Because another detail here that is fascinating, you see how kind of rugged and ruddy or kind of dirty the face looks in the daguerreotype?
Yes.
Remember, any red or pink pigmentation is going to go almost black,
Oh,
potentially.
okay,
So
okay.
you're getting an accentuation in the daguerreotype of that red color, whereas the lighter hues, like almost a paler skin, like you see this fold of skin around the mouth, the nasal labial fold on the lit side of the face.
Right, right.
That's almost, it's white. And you look at his ear color and you look at higher up on the forehead, right above the brow, you know, you don't see
Yes.
that darkness. So I can't say how much of that is shadow on the face, how much of that's red pigmentation in his skin. I can't say whether he had kind of kind of a. There's one claim that I haven't been able to document that he had a ruddy complexion. And it's the only source that ever claimed that. So I don't know if that's possible. But
Like olive complected.
no, ruddy would be a little bit reddish.
Oh, well,
And so
that's what
maybe,
that the painting looks very fair,
yeah,
ruddy.
you
Yeah,
get a little hints of it. So,
he's a
um,
blusher. Maybe he blushes a lot,
yeah,
or
yeah,
something.
he could be. But look at this. The daguerreotypist looks at that daguerreotype and he thinks, man, that guy's got really dark hair. And look how dark he paints the hair.
Right.
You almost can't see it against the background. That's how dark it is. And that's clearly a mistake by someone who's never seen Joseph's hair in life.
Exactly.
So even the hair color indicates that it's painted after he's killed. The next piece of evidence, some people think this is strange, but there are 14 anatomical differences between the painting and the daguerreotype. And these are things that you pointed out to me when we first met. One of the very first things you said is his eyes are big, giant, almond shaped,
Right.
and that's one of the differences, the eye size, but it's also the hairline at the top and then the what is supposedly the right side of the forehead. It's the width of the face. It's about 5% wider. It's the shape of the ears, the height of the nose. We already showed that it's too tall. It's the width of the mouth. It's 18% approximately too narrow. Why is that? What is going on here? Well, when I was comparing the daguerreotype to the pictures of Joseph's four sons, I came across there's only three known photographs of his second oldest son, Frederick. That's because Frederick died in 1862 at a very young age, just before his 26th birthday, if I remember correctly, and just a week or two before his birthday. Maybe it's 2.5, 3 weeks, whatever. But I noticed that Frederick has this kind of curved eyebrow and this flatter eyebrow. It's actually
Hmm.
evident in all three of his pictures. And that got me wondering. I thought, what if I compare the painting to Frederick? Because the painting also has this curved eye and this flatter eye. And I wondered, could it be that for some reason the painting matches Frederick's face in some way? I was just curious. And so imagine my surprise when I overlaid the contours of the painting and all three known pictures of Frederick, and I can show that there are 22 matches between the anatomy of Frederick's face as captured in these photos and the painting of his father, including every one of the 14 details in the painting that differ from the face in the unreversed Larsen daguerreotype, including, look at that middle image, a taller nose and a mouth that is about proportionally 18% less wide than his father's mouth.
Hmm.
And I went, oh my goodness, this looks like an artist was using Frederick as a live model to sketch out the basic shape of Frederick's face in place of his deceased father. And then he's taking the locket and he's giving, like, the size of the eyes and the spacing of the eyes appear to be Frederick's, but the shape of the eyes are straight off of the locket.
Hmm.
And it's kind of actually a very skillful mix of two faces, even if the final result is a bit awkward in its execution, its effect. I've always thought this painting looked a little V-shaped in the face, a little awkward, a little odd. And it's because of such things as the eyes are too large and the nose is too tall and the mouth is too narrow. It looks like the whole lower third is shrunken a little bit, like it should be bigger. And I've shown this to artists who have done posthumous portraits of people who've lived in the age of photography. And I've found two or three now who said, yeah, I've actually painted portraits or know someone who has of using a live model. In one case, a man's daughter looks so much like him. He used his daughter as a live sitting model, positioned her, lit her, got a sense of the living face, and then took the photographs. He sketched that out, then took the photographs of her father and
Yeah.
finished the portrait. So incredible.
Well,
The
it
the
seems
sixth
like
piece,
it's almost a style to capture their spirit. So you're not just having like you
yeah,
said,
yeah. I
from
mean,
the because okay, I draw. I've got. I'll show you someday. I drew in college. I did all kinds of stuff. I'm a cartoonist too, so I understand contour and I understand anatomy and I understand what you're talking about. When you draw somebody from a photo, it doesn't look as animated or alive. It doesn't have what we call movement
mhm.
unless you draw it from a live. So it was very important for artists in the old days to have a relative, if they're drawing somebody that's already deceased, to combine it with another person that has
It's
been
a
deceased.
very fascinating detail, and I
Yeah.
understand why you would do that, right? Um, the sixth piece of evidence of those eight is this portrait of Emma, which also supposedly was created by David Rogers in 1842. I won't have time to show you all the evidence, but this is a carte de visite copy of the first known daguerreotype of Emma Smith. It was taken with young David Hiram sleeping in her lap based on his guesstimated age by pediatricians. We think this photo was taken about September of 1845, more than a year after Joseph was killed. And it turns out that her portrait is based on the reversed daguerreotype. This is how
Ah,
you would see it in life. And
right.
so those two portraits appear to have been commissioned by someone who had access to those two daguerreotypes, and the artist used those as their reference material. And the one on the left, we know when it was taken after the martyrdom. And the one on the right, we didn't know existed until almost through, till July of 2022. Just incredible.
That is
So
incredible.
based on the strength of that
That
alone,
is
I wrote up,
amazing.
yeah,
Sorry.
isn't it? So
Yeah.
putting all that evidence together, and even stuff I had don't have time to show you, uh, wrote that up, and I've given that evidence to four different forensic anthropologists. Because people ask, Curtis is not a trained forensic anthropologist. He's not a trained artist. He's not a trained photographer. He's not a trained anatomist. Why should we trust anything he says or any of this evidence? And so I know that, and I have always wanted to show professionals my work. So what I'm going to show you now is for the first time, with their permission, I'm going to tell you about what the
For the
professionals have to
first
say
time.
for the first time. So you should know that, again, four different experts looked at it. They wrote three reviews, one of the reviews being co-written by two experts.
Okay.
Now, one of the reviews was extremely negative, extremely, like very negative. And you would think I wouldn't want to tell the world about it, but in fact, I wish I could show it and it could show you my analysis of it. Because at least every major claim in that negative review is demonstrably incorrect, demonstrably, you know, controverted by forensically sound evidence.
Okay.
But I can't because it was a anonymous peer review, and I was able to by what it said and the sources it cited, I was able to discern who it was, and I have since confirmed with the author. But the author refuses to give me permission to make it
That's
public, and has
okay.
even threatened to sue me.
Mm.
So I wish I could show it. I
But
really do, because
but we're maybe some biasness here.
maybe, yeah.
Okay.
But the other three expert reviews were positive, and I'm going to share just a little bit from them with you right now. The first expert I ever talked to, his name is Mark Dobbs. Uh, he worked for 18 years or so as a forensic anthropologist, consulting with law enforcement agencies in the San Francisco area. He taught anthropology, both biological and forensic, at the collegiate level. He completed a forensic facial identification course led by a woman named Gatliff, who I believe, I don't remember if she's passed on now. Anyway, she was one of the world's leading experts in facial reconstruction at the time. Back in 2006, he did that. Uh, I think he knows his stuff enough. I said, "Do you know enough to tell me if I'm, barking up the wrong tree or if I'm doing things crazy and if I'm just not doing anything?" He says, "Sure." He showed me everything. I spent 2.5 hours, showed him everything from my 2008 research on the skulls and masks all the way up to this photo, such as I had it, mostly what you had seen, although I didn't have 76 details of the painting, only 50 at the time, I think. And here's a part of what he said in his written review that he gave me after talking with me and seeing everything. Based on my education, training, and experience, I find Weber's work to be highly rigorous and entirely consistent with forensic level best practices. Weber's work, in my estimation, is quite thorough and adheres to sound anthropological principles and forensic standards. I have seen many cases where much less work went into resolving identity in modern forensic matters, to be honest. I see no defect in methodology or omission of critical detail that would lead me to discount his conclusion. Now, you could imagine how thrilled I was to hear a
Wow.
professional say that. In fact, on the phone, he said it to me this way. He said, there isn't anything we would do that you haven't already done in terms of testing or analyzing the photo, and we wouldn't have done it any better.
Right.
And that was gratifying, not because I need people to praise me. Like if
No.
no one knows my name, it's the fact that I'm doing very careful work, and I was happy to know that the evidence I was uncovering is very forensically sound evidence. I knew that I was being very careful and trying to follow rigorous methodologies that professionals use, but hearing that from an actual professional was gratifying.
Yes. Well, and
Now,
he doesn't come out and just say, "Yes, this is indeed that person." But
yeah,
he
yeah, because what I had, that evidence doesn't prove, none of this proves that it's him.
right.
It
But
just strongly indicates that it's him.
but he also doesn't say that you like well, obviously he doesn't say you omitted anything and he doesn't say that you coerced or, forced a narrative
Forcing a
even.
conclusion or something
Right.
out of it. Yeah.
Right.
To me, then this is the natural conclusion from the evidence. All these conclusions I've had so far, they force themselves upon me by the strength of the evidence, and they're overturning things I believed since 2008 when I first began studying this whole question. So
Gotcha.
let me show you the next one because this one was really something special for me. Caroline Wilkinson is the director of Face Lab in Liverpool, England. She is a world-renowned forensic anthropologist, and I've known her name since 2008. I used her 2008 book, Forensic Facial Reconstruction, as part of my studies to prepare myself for my skull identification work when I did all
Okay.
that, that research project. And so I've known her name since 2008, and I've wanted for 15 years for her to review my work. And when I found out that she was one of the experts that they got to review, I was very happy. Her co-author in the review is a research assistant at Face Lab who just has a PhD in face recognition. I joke, who doesn't these days? But none of us need, not many people have PhDs in face recognition, I'm sure. And so I was, even though I don't know her by reputation, I have no reason to doubt her credentials. And I was thrilled to read. Here's a couple of excerpts from there. It's about a 6 or 7 page review. The author, me, also carries out a morphological comparison. That's a fancy term for essentially a shape comparison, the form comparison between the Larsen daguerreotype and the death masks. The author describes consistent features at the chin, mouth, nose, temple, brow, hairline, eyebrows, and eyes, with matching asymmetry noted at the chin, nasal root, nasal labial creases, philtrum, and supraorbital region. This morphological comparison appears rigorous, and we would agree with the majority of the assessment.
Wow.
We agree that there are multiple correspondences between the daguerreotype and the death masks and Maudsley drawings. Therefore, we agree that the daguerreotype is likely an authentic image of Joseph Smith in life.
Ooh. Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
I was so thrilled to read that conclusion and to see who gave it. And what's really more amazing is normally peer review is done, anonymously. they submitted it with their names both at the top of the report and digitally signed on the bottom of the
So they
PDF
have
with the date
nothing to
timestamps.
lose. They have
Yep.
they have no there's no motivation for them to be to be swayed in any way whatsoever.
They
So
were approached by someone
if
other than
anything,
me.
more critical, right?
Yeah. And so I was just thrilled. You know,
That's
what could you say
amazing, brother.
other than, oh,
Congratulations on
wow?
that one.
Well, thank you to us all, right? This is like, wow, to hear this from
Yes.
experts, right? So now what I want to show you now is the evidence I've discovered since April 2023. And the reason I want to show that to you is because this evidence that I've discovered is evidence I've discovered after these my evidence was submitted to these experts for review. So this has not been expert reviewed yet. And I would love to have Caroline Wilkinson and any number of experts review this new evidence, because it's evidence that has caused me to change my assessment of the daguerreotype, and I strongly believe it would change their assessment as well. So let me begin by showing you that. So in the spring or early summer of 2023, I began using the Church History Department's 3D model of the Dibble mask more extensively. And I found that the Dibble mask fits the daguerreotype even better than the pedestal mask at the hairline at the chin. And that's because the nose in the Dibble mask is slightly wider, about 3% wider. And I was using the scale of the nose to match the nose in the daguerreotype. And it turns out if you have a slightly larger nose, then you have to shrink the mask down to fit that size. And that caused the hairline to be even better. So the oldest known death mask fits even better to the daguerreotype
Oh my
than the
goodness.
second oldest mask.
Absolutely.
The expert who wrote the negative review, I will say one thing. He hated this. He doesn't, I shouldn't say hated. He says this is what amateurs do. We don't contour trace. He's the only anthropologist who's told me that. So I suspect that there's probably differences of opinion on different methodologies. I do know that there are different schools of thought about how to do craniofacial reconstruction, for instance. So instead of tracing the shapes like I've done, he prefers using what are called cephalometric landmarks, or specific points at anatomical features on the face. And so here, as you can see, I've identified 17 such landmarks in the daguerreotype. And using this methodology also reveals numerous precise correspondences between the
Oh
mask and
wow.
daguerreotype. Yeah, contrary to this expert's negative claims.
Yeah.
Now, after I found that the Dibble mask fits the daguerreotype even better, I began using the model, since I could strip the surface of all the color and just look at shapes, to test the 4 or 5 major criticisms of the daguerreotype. And Troy, I have discovered evidence that addresses all of them. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, so I only have time to show you one line of evidence that I
Okay.
discovered while testing just one of those criticisms. And that's that the nose in the daguerreotype is too small to be Joseph's. I've heard that claim from almost day one. I've
Mm-hmm.
been very interested in claims both for and against and what people have said about it. Everything you've seen me do is usually in response to someone has said something. Is that true or not true? Can I find evidence for or against that claim? And I was already able to show with 2-dimensional data that the height and width of the nose match the mask, as do the shape of the flesh around the
Mm-hmm.
nostrils and the nostrils
Right.
themselves. But what about the 3-dimensional shape, or the volume, the size of the nose,
You
right?
mean coming
Is it,
forward?
yes, the
Oh, I
prominence
can
of
see
Joseph's
it. I
nose.
can see a
You can,
side
well,
profile. I
I'm
see a
glad you can
profile.
see it.
I can see.
What
No,
I
well,
thought,
like I say, I draw. I know if he was
yeah, yeah,
sitting at
yeah.
a 3/4 profile or even a profile, I definitely a beak. Definitely,
So,
because of the bridge of
so
the nose. I
me
can
not
tell by
being
the.
as trained as you, right? I'm not as trained as that. I couldn't answer that, but I wanted to do it with science, right? And
Right.
it turns out there's a branch of science called sciography, which is what you've probably studied as an artist, how light and shadow are used to properly depict a 3-dimensional form,
Right
right?
here, the bridge of the nose, and even the
That's
shadow came
that's
down
right.
right here.
So because we have the 3-dimensional shape of Joseph's nose in the mask, I realized that we could use these principles to test claims about the nose, right? So any 3-dimensional object will create the same shadows when it's lit in the same way, right? And so I realized we have the 3-dimensional shape in the death mask, such as it is.
Mm-hmm.
And we can light the mask at angles similar to the face in the daguerreotype just to see if the nose of the mask could cast a shadow that's similar to the shadow seen on the right cheek in the daguerreotype here, right? So that's just this very simple question. What will happen when you try to light it in the same way? So that requires us to analyze the picture a little bit. It's a very complex uh, lighting setup with multiple sources casting light at different angles, different intensities. But the strongest light is clearly coming from above and to his left based off the highlights on the forehead, the nose, and the chin, top of the chin. And then there's a strong fill light coming from his left, casting the darker shadows on the right side of the face. And then there's even a fill light coming in from the right of his face, casting the shadows that we're seeing on the right side of the face. And there's other sources of light. There's ambient light bouncing off objects in the room and so forth, and also absorbing light. So I can't perfectly replicate the lighting scenario. But here, what I've done is I've lit the mask strongly from above left and then just to the left of the mask. So two different lights are on the mask in this image. And then I've adjusted the levels to make the shadows a bit easier to see here. And then Troy, I just used Photoshop. You use Photoshop. I just used the wand select tool with its default 32 tolerance right out of the box, default setting to trace the contour of the deepest shadows on the three-dimensional form when it's lit in this way. And then all you have to do is simply remove the mask and see what we see.
There you go.
And I looked at that and said, not only is it a pretty dang good match at the right cheek, but it's also
No.
the crest of the nose and the brow and the right depth of the right eye socket.
Mm-hmm.
How the shadow dips under the tip of his nose and then slips back down, stepping down over his upper right lip, even where his lower right lip and his lower right eye and eyeball fall into shadow, which you can see a little bit more clearly if I adjust the levels. Troy, three-dimensional correspondences, just as you said you could see.
Yeah.
But now this is forensic, rigorous forensic evidence that the three-dimensional shapes correspond. This man's face and the death mask.
Mm-hmm.
And I shouldn't have been so stunned, but I didn't expect it. I just thought, well, if it is him, I should be able to see the same shadow on the nose, and not thinking I would see shadows from the brow all the way down to the lips. It was stunning. And you can see it, you know what the posterized filter is. It reduces the number of colors that Photoshop uses, which kind of creates a stronger boundary between light and shadow. You can play with the settings and see different things, but it just presents a different way to see where shadows are on the face. And again, I was just so surprised to find that the three-dimensional spatial relationships in the mask are evident in the photograph as well. I've moved the light around to different positions. I'll just show you a couple more. Here's strongly lit from his right side, casting a darker shadow on the left side of the mask. And this is how it matches at the crest of the nose, at the left eye socket, where his left eyelid and eye fall into shadow, even where his upper and lower lip fall into shadow, which again, you can see a little more clearly in some instances with different filters. I like the posterized because it really helps. Let me zoom in a little bit on this. Look at that eye shadow up here, Troy. Just
Oh yeah.
amazing. Even that little contour change. And then look at the nose. I was blown away by the nose from the tip about 75% of the way up to the brow. Just an amazingly precise correspondence to the shadows on the ridges.
And like I said, I've drawn so many noses. It's a Roman esque. It's a Roman like nose. You have a
Yeah.
smaller, thinner, blade like bridge. Um, and even the paintings in the 1850s, when people were painted, it was very cartoonish. It was
Yeah.
almost like the
It
Campbell's
can be.
kids.
Yeah. Well, let me show you my favorite one because even though he's not lit this way in the photo, I was moving the light around to see different things about the three-dimensional shape of the mask. And here I was trying to learn something about the orbital bones, the brow ridges there above each eye. And here the light is placed dead center in the middle of the mask and slightly forward of it. And again, I was just trying to catch different shadows. And I learned something about the brows, but I actually learned something about the eyes, Troy. When you trace the shadows of the mask, you can see there's a clear asymmetry between his left and right eye sockets. And I had not noticed that before. In fact, what's happening here is you kind of get this consistent arc over his right eyelid but his left eyelid has this kind of tighter curve on the inside corner. Well, that difference is caused by a slightly deeper and slightly wider indentation at the left eye socket as compared to his right. That's a natural asymmetry that's present in the death mask. And I'm going to make you play artist slash forensic anthropologist for me, Troy. I'm
Okay.
going to remove the mask, and you're going to tell me what you see when you compare the shape of the curvature of his closed eyelids to the shape of the curvature in the opened eyelids.
I see uh the well, I see the daguerreotype, but I see the same thing.
Yeah, I'm going to lower it. Just watch how precise the correspondence is. Those white lines are contours, three-dimensional, a shape caused by three-dimensionality of the eyeballs and eyelids in the death
Yes.
mask. And the same exact asymmetry is seen in
Well,
the reversed daguerreotype. I'll remind you, this is reversed. Stunning asymmetry in the left and right eyes.
yeah.
And
Well,
it's not even just the eyes. Look at this real quick. It's all the way down the face in that single image, 26 correspondences, even down to asymmetries in his chin, revealed by a single light bulb placed above the mask.
wow. And I'm
Isn't
I'm
that
putting
crazy?
my thumbs over his eyes because people don't understand. They think, big almond eyes when his eyes are closed. When you lift him up, the eyelids do different things depending on the DNA, right?
Yep. And on the contours and
And,
shape,
and
and
the
yeah.
brow and the contours and the shapes. Yep.
But look how the eyes are framed. I mean, by the shadows in the mask. It's beautiful. Now, let me
Yes.
show you. The last thing I'll show you here is this one slightly different methodology. Same principle, but instead of lighting it with one or two lights at a time, here's three lights all at once around the mask. And instead of clicking one shadow, I'm going to create a contour mapping of the face using the gradients of light across the face. And I do that by selecting one single pixel, that little pixel there in the deepest shadow of the nose. And I simply click that exact pixel repeatedly using the wand select tool in Photoshop. But each time I'm going to change the tolerance setting from very low to high. So here it is at 4 and at 16 and 28 and so forth. And I color each contour differently. So to be clear, if someone who's watching doesn't know what this means, tolerance is if I were to set the tolerance to 0, and you would know this, Troy, if I click a colored pixel or a black in a black and white picture, a certain shade of gray, the wand tool will only select that exact color or that
Yes.
exact shade of gray, right?
Right.
And if you set it to 4, it will go plus or minus 4 levels of lightness or darkness on either side of that shade of gray. And so what I've done here is I've actually done it every 2 levels of tolerance from 0 all the way up to over 100. But if I showed every line, you would see nothing but colored lines. This is a three-dimensional, these are complex three-dimensional contours on the surface of the mask revealed when it's lit in this manner. So just to be clear, if I were to move the lights around to different positions, those contour lines would move around and change, but they would still be contours on the surface of the mask. So these specific contours are the ones that result when you light it strongly from above left and from the left and a little bit from the right. Okay. Now, what are you going to see when I remove the mask? Any predictions? Are you a gambling man? I know we are against pari-mutuel gambling and other things in the church, but watch this, Troy. Tell me what you see. I'll
Amazing.
increase the contrast a little bit.
Amazing. Amazing. Well,
It
I've already
is.
seen this before when you showed me at the.
Oh, I did show you some of this,
Yes,
didn't I?
but
Yeah,
I
yeah.
told you don't leave this part out. This if
No,
this
no.
all if this is all you did today, this
Yeah.
was my favorite part right here.
This is a three-dimensional contour mapping of the death mask overlaid on the daguerreotype, and you can see correspondences from forehead all the way down to chin. And in Photoshop, you can go and remove lines, and you can make them dashed, and you can look so you can see more of the daguerreotype behind, and you can change the filters so you can
Right.
see and hide more detail, and
So
it's
if
just
I could
amazing.
say in layman's terms, these are the dimensions of the face. The dimensions of the face
Yes,
match identically to
it's not just dimensions though in
death mask.
2D. These are
Right.
three-dimensional
Three
correspondences,
dimensional.
right? Yeah. Look at this one detail. I'll go over this one carefully. that shadow at the corner of the mouth. Well, when you zoom in on it and trace that upper contour there, tolerance level 76, and then hide all the others, you can see clearly how that shadow corresponds to that contour in the
That
mask.
is
That's
crazy.
a
That is
prominent feature.
crazy, dude.
Look what the computer says when you just increase the contrast. It says that's where the shadow ends. That is a very
Uh,
specific detail.
what do
Let's
we
look at
want? What more what more do they
I don't
want?
know. I don't know. Look at the philtrum. Look at that left filtral column, how it's in shadow, but only the top half of it is, and then how it follows and even down to
Can I
the
tell you what's
cupids.
going through my head right now, Curtis? Is
Sure,
I need to
sure.
get the right title for this so I get people in here. And that's
Yeah.
all that's going. Look, the name of our game is thumbnail and title. If you don't do those right, they don't come in. So I
Well, I
got to
wish you the
think
best
about.
of luck on that.
Oh, I'll get it. Don't worry, I'm good at it.
All right, let me
Uh,
show you, let me slide up to the right brow is one of our last details we're going to look at. Look at this bulge at the top of the right brow there in the mask and in the daguerreotype. How it starts high and then dips and then rises, then dips a little bit, then rises a little bit, then dips a little more in the mask, then rises again, then dips a little bit further in the mask, then rises almost, then follows the deepest shadow along the right edge of the nose. I
amazing.
was stunned to see that level of detail from the brow in the death mask. As you were mentioning earlier, the right side has a lot more detail in the right brow than the left. But speaking of the left, look at the correspondence of that same exact tolerance line, level 16 on the left side. The deepest shadow of that brow is the same shape, almost exactly the same shape. I mean,
Oh,
it's amazing. And you
wow.
can change again to different contours. Here's level 40 and level 100. And Troy there matches from the right eye to the right side of the brow and nose, the left side of the nose and brow, and the left eye. And then look at his left cheek. You know, people say this guy doesn't have the same cheekbones. It's like, well, the death mask and daguerreotypes say otherwise. That kind of consistent arc on his left cheek. And then look at the right cheek, how it rises, then dips, and then rises again. Uh, Very asymmetrical shapes resulting when you light the mask from these angles, and they're both in the death mask and the daguerreotype. And so this single image of the mask, Troy, 46 contour correspondences between the two. That's the most
Wow.
I can produce, or I haven't tried to do more from a single image
I
of
see
the
the
death mask.
death mask.
Yeah, that's because those lines are the death mask contours.
No, it's not just that. I see. Oh my goodness. That is
Isn't that
crazy.
incredible? And of course, you know that a line is just an infinite series of points. So I could churn each line into three dots, the beginning, middle, and end of a contour correspondence, and I'm up to 138. Or I could play this game and quintuple it, or I could multiply it by 10. Literally, there are thousands, not, you could say millions, but they'd be very small dots. But I can plot hundreds, if not thousands, of points in three-dimensional space on the death mask and show
Okay.
correspondences to the face.
So how common is this with with uh with it not being a match?
That I can't say. I can say
Okay.
things like, for instance, how many correspondences do you think would be required to prove that your fingerprint or
Okay.
your finger is the finger that left a fingerprint on a murder weapon?
Right.
How many would you hope? You would hope it's a high number, right?
Yes.
It's 8 to 12 in most legal
Okay,
cases. 8
that's
to 12, yeah.
okay.
And then some experts say it should be 20. Okay. Now, I can show you in this image right here 138.
Yeah,
And
that's
not just
be
two-dimensional, but three-dimensional correspondences.
that's beyond
So
proof. That's
yeah, this
beyond
is
proof.
beyond proof. So
Yeah.
so this is why I say my assessment has changed. And again, I haven't been able to show this to experts yet, but I believe most experts, the vast majority would agree. This new evidence is more than sufficient to
Well,
say this is a positive identification. This is absolutely a photograph of the prophet Joseph Smith.
and even Larson, what's Larson's first name again? Uh,
Dan Larsen.
Dan Larson, his character. I know he's a beautiful human being. He's a very trustworthy human being. I know I've seen, and just the it didn't go very many hands down, and
No.
the guy would not have done this without thinking, well, this might not be him. It This is the prophet Joseph Smith.
Isn't that
I'll
incredible?
say that. I'll declare that, and I'll hang it up in my
So do I
house.
now. With this level of evidence, I'm stunned to be able to say it to everybody, but I do. And Troy, I am grateful the fact that I got to be involved in this research, that I was led to this. Would never have predicted this was part of my life, and that this little daguerreotype, this literally, that I realized this a couple weeks ago, this little metal record has been preserved and has come forth in our day. It's just an immense blessing. And in fact, you can use modern technology and all the sources we have to imagine what it'll be like one day to see the prophet and to hear him testify. And we all know we're going to see him again. And we knew him before we came, but it's just amazing that we have this much evidence and this little picture to show us the face, even at such as it is, blurry a little bit, little grainy, very small, colors distorted, but we can imagine what it would be like to see Joseph.
Thank you so much, Brother Weber. You always
You're
get
welcome.
emotional every time you talk
Yeah,
about that.
it's
Folks, every
stunning.
time I would walk by him, you'd have like a group of two or three. You know, this and it amazed me just the emotional impact it has on you every single time Curtis Weber speaks about this, just with a group of 1 to 10 people. It's not about you getting to disclose something that nobody else knows. It's more about you wanting to reveal the identity of
I
prophet,
want to
seer,
share it.
and
That's
revelator.
right. I want to share it with anyone and everyone who's interested in the prophet, especially those who believe in him and have believed in his mission and his declarations and his witness of Christ. It's just it's a blessing. Some people are nonplussed by it and they're like, okay, so what? I get that too. Me, it's like, wow, even though I've been doing this research for almost 3 years and I look at it almost every day or think about it not every day, but almost. And I just think it's amazing that we have this, that we know what the prophet looked like. It's not going to change the course of my life in the way I live my life in a certain sense, other than I've spent a lot of time on this project. But wow, the face of the prophet Joseph Smith, just incredible, just incredible.
Amen. Thank you, brother.
I,
Oh,
you're
by
welcome.
by the way, if anybody wants to watch a longer version of this,
I did a 3-hour interview with Steve Pineker about 2 years ago that goes more into the first part of the data that I kind of went over very quickly
oh, that
because I
was
wanted to
two
be able to
years
show you.
ago. I thought that
That
was
was two
recently,
years ago. Yeah, well, it was almost 2 years ago. It was 2 years ago in June,
and
this
he's
coming
been
June.
waiting to release it. That's what it is.
No, he released that one. That's a 3-hour video, and
Okay.
we recorded another interview talking about the new evidence, and that's a little bit longer than what we've gone in. Although you've actually come close to what the length
Okay.
of that one.
Well,
So
I told him I'd plug him too if you guys want to go watch his as well. But
on
I'm
Mormon
plugging
Book
him at the
Reviews.
end because I want people to watch mine as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, brother. Come back again if we need to add more to this, or uh, I don't know. Let's find out what the Savior looked like. I don't-
We got
okay.
other teams working on that apparently. So,
Yeah, right. All right. You take
all
care.
right. Thank you, Troy.
Okay. Bye bye.